possible and have seen all the patterns. And in fact, I started my second book to explain, because it'll take a book to explain. So, it's not always just get to. Tonight, we're going to just look at the world of plants. Okay, most of it will be from their point of view. However, how's it going to compare with ours? People, and we'll talk about this a bit. We live inside this box. It's a word for that. We'll get to it in a second. Whose reality we're talking about? You or the wolf? Management? Politics? We're going to talk about them all. Because they all come together and it's called wolf management. So the wolves are important here. Management and science as well. So for those of you who hear the word science and you freak out, don't worry about it. We'll guide you through it. It's not that tough. However, I want to get a kind of an idea of how you guys think about wolves. So when you see or hear this word, what's your first reaction? That's not a word. Smart. Oh, okay. Social. Keystone species, what?
Little Red Riding
Yeah, I hear that one a lot. Yeah. Survivor, yes. Big.
Hungry.
Wild, yes. Those seem to be the epitome of wildness for most people.
Possibly telepathic.
Possibly. Okay. Well, it's all a matter of perspective. For every person here, you got a different answer. So, our entire issue with wolves is based on your perspective. And where does your perspective go? How do you perceive the world? So let's all start on the same page. Okay, and then we'll build up towards the wolves, management, the numbers, everything. We're going down a rabbit hole now, so hang on to your hat. The word, or the box you live in, is called Umwelt. Everybody hear of it? It's a German psychology term. I guess if you're really German, it's Umwelt, but I'm not German, so it's Umwelt. We all live inside our little world. We're all human beings here. However, we all see and feel things quite differently. Those responses to the word wolf are a good example. Jay says one thing one time. Some people, when they answer the seat, like, ooh, what's going to say next? Others are like, well, I had nothing to do with it. But it's still one Jay saying one thing one time. Okay? All these different perspectives. Well, it turns out no organism perceives all available information. For example, you see what you see because of light. In fact, we call it visible light because we can see it. You don't see infrared, right? But it still exists. Well, all organisms are that way. We're all limited. Therefore, when we make decisions, we're using limited information. Keep that in mind when you go through all this. Your umwelts are based on a lot of things. Physiology, your anatomy, your mood, your past experience, almost anything you could possibly do. But it shapes you. So, the point of all this is organisms perceive a range of perception. Not everything. Can you imagine all the information out there is to know? They all came into your brain. Your head would explode. So we know a range of things. For example, you live your life based on how an ant colony lives there. No. You even know there's an ant colony around somewhere? Intellectually. But you don't make daily decisions based on that. Bees, for example, they do see the ultraviolet. They see landing pads on leaves. You see the landing pads? No. Does that mean a landing pad doesn't exist? No. So there's all these different worlds there. And they're all called over. So, we have perceptual limitations in the human world. That includes how we perceive worlds. For example, science can measure some of this stuff. When you go to the movies, is that really a 20-foot face talking to you? No. What is it really? It's that when you go to the movies, what is it really? I know it looks real, and it's real motion.
Maybe 30 frames.
Right. So it's a bunch of frames per second. right? So when it comes to motion, not visual acuity, which is sharpness of the image, just the motion. When this study was done, about 70 frames per second. That's real motion for us. Your brain perceives it that. If it's too many frames per second, like over here, or beyond that, now you see faster. He's moving fast on film. If it's less than that, slow motion, right? And eventually you don't see motion at all. It's like a Cessna. Right? Did the film stop moving? No. Your brain stopped. It has limits. Well, it turns out this real motion here, it's called the flicker point. Certain frames per second are flickering by the lens. Okay? It's tricking your brain into thinking that's real motion. Well, it turns out science can measure some of this stuff. If you know the flicker point of another species, you know how they perceive it. For example, my roommate in college, we can't do this anymore. He was in the dorm, or we were both in the dorm room. Well, he was a herpetologist. They study snakes and everything. Well, we had no book, rattlesnake, and 14-foot bullets. That's why you can't do this anymore. So we were the popular dorm room. Well, what do you think fed the snake? Rats. Bigger rats. Correct. Well, scientists got together and figured out, not because of my roommate, but because they wanted to know what the flicker point was of a snake. Turns out to be 90 frames per second. But it overlaps with us. So, when he put this rat in this tank, it was a giant tank. I mean, it was like from here over here with a big glass front, so you can see what's going on. Well, the rat was put in there, but it wasn't eaten right away. It took a day or two. Meanwhile, it's running around thinking, this is not what you want, and it's trying to get out of it. Well, the snake would be coiled, and it would flip its skin like this. Well, the rat saw that, and panicked, jumped up, and ran across the other side of the tank. So we saw a white balloon. What do the snakes see? Some motion too, but what do they see? Don't say dinner, is that right? Well, you don't have to be the snake to answer the question if you know the flicker point. Real motion for us, but it was a blur. Therefore, it was out here somewhere. The rat motion. But the snake, it overlaps with us. So what did it see? What was the speed of the rat? Slow motion. One rat did one thing one time, and one species saw it as fast motion, the other saw it as slow motion. Who's correct? Both. So what does that say? You make things up. You don't fill in the gaps. So not all of your reality is measured. You interpret it.
No, rats were
The rat's flicker point? Yeah, no one measured that. He was dead. So each species, each individual, they all perceive the surroundings differently. For example, a captive wolf, or one who grew up in captivity, is going to perceive their environment quite differently than one that came from the wild and was now put into captivity. Very different worlds. Well, it turns out you're going to see these two because I studied exactly that for several years. So we'll get to that. But when it comes to measuring their environment, animals use a whole array of senses. They're not complete, meaning dolphins don't hear every single sound, and so on. But there is one sense that some species in general tend to use the most. For example, what do chimps use the most? Or depend on them. And their brain, as it turns out, their brain circuitry reflects this. Vision. So those primates, you need binocular vision so you don't miss the brain. Dolphins? Hearing, sound, good. How about wolves? Smell, very good. Now notice they're all mammals, but they're all specialized, depending on what niche in the environment they are. So whose reality is correct? They all are, because there's a lot of information out there. Their world is just as real to them as yours is. That means pain, suffering, joy, all of that. We know that now. We even know where in the brain you can find these things. So there's almost an infinite number of worlds out there all exist in some ways. However, My notes are still paced and real reference points. Like there was a landing pad on that leaf. It didn't disappear because you can't see it. For example, there's a cliff over there. Those who don't perceive the cliff somehow only make that mistake once. Correct? So it doesn't matter how you perceive it, just perceive it. Make sense? So what's the unknowable? How do we perceive it? What do we know about that? It turns out we don't know all about it. A bunch of dogs running through the woods, everyone's having a tantrum about it, and we don't know that. Well, let's start with old-fashioned. Most estimates of their smelling abilities come from domestic dogs because wolves aren't so quiet. However, the sensory receptors inside your sinuses and so on, that's the olfactory epithelium. It's a thin layer of moist tissue that have receptors sticking to it. Well, per square inch, dogs have more than we do. So wolves, it's estimated, are up to thousands to 1 million times better smellers than we do. Now, when you see 1,000 to 1 million, that means we don't have to. But the most accepted estimate is at 100,000 times better than this. That's so beyond our own dog, we don't even know what that means. So, here's an advocate to get across the point. If you're all blindfolded, and a deer came through this door, walked through here, down the center aisle, and out, if you weren't hearing the little clicks of its nails on the wood here, you wouldn't even know its existence. And then, as I'll tell her, take your blindfolds off. There was a deer that walked. It's like, yeah, yeah. No, get down and go for it. You can't do it. So what this means is, 3 days later, your dog will come in your track. That's how good a sniffers they are. We don't live in that kind of world. We have a different world. So, why be so sensitive to odors? Well, sorry, go ahead. It's for marking their territory. So, scat makes good visual markers. Just the urine thing your dogs all do. Most of that's for territorial boundaries. So when wolves are walking their territory, they just don't urinate anywhere. I mean, that's a lot of urine. So they make choices. It's usually around the perimeter. Intersections of trails in the territory itself where most wolves will come by. So you can be there and say, well, it's likely the wolf's going to come by and get your message. So what's the message? Well, it gives relative time info, for example. Oh, you were here about a week ago. Or, you just had dinner, didn't you? So if you're a wolf, not from the pack, say, well, I think I'll just get out of here. Also, in urine, feces, hormones are released. They can tell your gender. If you're male, female hormones. Your reproductive status, if you're female. Stress hormones, living in a hierarchy system as a wolf pack can be very stressful, which means if you can identify those hormones, you may be able to say, oh, I know your general hierarchy status. Where are you slotted into the pack, socially speaking? Also, you need a good sniffer to find your prey. Turns out wolves can smell illness. You have 5,000 caribou right in front of you, and there's 6 wolves. Somebody's sick, they're going to find you. How do they do it? How do they try to do it? You know?
They look and they smell.
They know. Now what? You get them to run. So they charge right in there and get ready to break up the smaller groups. Now, when you're doing that, as the wolves are running after smell you, oh, you have a broken leg. It sucks to be you. Because now it's easier to get you. So we'll just change their agenda. Yeah. So we'll start with the general, work towards the specific. It's also for tracking. Just like I was saying about the deer. Where are they? Let's go find that where to begin with. Also, they need to find each other. Packs don't often stay together as a group very much. We're going to talk about that. So how do you find each other again? Well, it turns out they have scent glands between their toes. So every time they take a step, they leave a scent. So now you have a wolf sticking his head in the forest going, and a whole plethora of trails. We need a topo map to do that. not these guys. So they can follow each other. You know when your dog urinates, defecates, or whatever, and is scratching around? Well, that's a visual marker, and it leads us in. They're doing all those strange things for a reason, which means you just can't move anywhere. So in Montana, when it's 20 below in the winter, it's like, oh, God, you go. No. I gotta go where I got the highest probability of giving my messages. Now that takes 20 minutes, too bad for you. Put on a check. They also track each other. Hearing, for most information, again, comes from domestic. Turns out wolves rarely have ordinary hearing abilities like we do with lower frequencies. However, higher frequencies, everyone knows the story of the dog running to the window, oh, and the mouse just turned the corner and they're tall, right? So they can hear things you can't, like a dolphin, they're not that far up. They have a whole repertoire of sound production, including howls, whines, whimpers, and chucks. A chuck is they blow their cheeks out. It's usually the one to tell the wolves behind something's up. Oh, for barking, wolves rarely bark. A barking wolf is a very agitated wolf, so they tend to howl more. The uses of their great hearing. Well, there's pack spacing. One pack's howling to the other, saying, "This is my territory, don't come over here." So it helps avoid social conflict. They don't harmonize when they do this. 4 wolves are they're not singing the same note. Different. The main guy just, that's me. Why is that?
They're displaying their number
No, they're not. It's actually the opposite.
by probably 4 different voices.
Yeah, it sounds like it's more chaotic. Here's a larger pack. However, I was laughing just because everybody's doing it. If you're so good at hearing, yeah, would you be able to select out who that is? So we don't really know. For emotions. So among individuals, this is like within your pack, you're doing this. The whines are social. Whimpers are social. Chucks are for the warnings that we just talked about. And growls are warnings. Now, when wolves are hunting, are they hunting with like the hackles up? Are they growling? No. Hunting's hunting. It's a violent act. It's not one of anger. I just need to eat. All this stuff's social. So they can communicate with each other and keep some harmony in a stressful situation. This is their hierarchy. And we need to howl find each other. So they howl, dude. Back members of out at the fish trap back, you've seen it for years, and they were howling at each other as they were coming back together after a hunt. It's fascinating. They were miles apart. And I think you're involved. That's kind of neat. Howl mostly at night. Why is that? Well, sound travel, very good. In the day, this is like a day today. The air is warming up, so it rises. Cool air in the shade of the tree, sinks. What sound? Well, it's just disruption of air molecules. Well, it's already being disrupted. So you send your sound out there and it all dissipates. At night, it's the same temperature, very even, and your howl goes for moments. So we used to do our survey.
Also, I think more active at night, so they've got more reason.
Not necessarily, no. They're almost like 24-hour animals. Not as individuals, but as a pack. It's just perpetual motion. They also mute their howls. I'm sitting on the side of a mountain, like during the day. 2 wolves are finding each other. I know that because they were radio calling. And one's going, "Rrr, rrr," and I start laughing. It's like, you're not fooling me. But they're keeping it, they're doing it on purpose, not to be found. Because every time you put your sound out there, everybody knows who you are, including your enemies. Vision. Again, most studies come from domestic dogs. Ask yourself, how do you know this? Well, someone found a wolf, got the retina out of their eye, assuming it was dead, chopped it all up, used histology, and now you can see the rods and the cones and all the sensors in the retina when you look at the microscope. That's how we know. Proportionally, canids have more rods than cones. Everybody heard of the rods and the cones? These are the sensors in your retina. Cones are for color, rods are for black and white vision and movement. Their visual acuity, meaning the sharpness of the image, is just as good as ours. However, because they have more rods than cones, they have much greater sensitivity for night vision and movement. We're kind of blinded. It takes our eyes a long time to adjust. And even then, low lights are reversible. Well, the cones, anybody know how many cones primates have? Different systems of cones, colors? We have red, green, and blue. Okay? We're missing the red. So these animals live in a purple and blue world that see sharp images. Because the color's not going to do you any good at night. So why waste the metabolic energy to maintain the structure you never going to use? They also have something called a tapetum lucidum, which is a parabolic dish of tissue behind the retina. So when light comes in, it bounces off and goes back to the retina and can be reprocessed. So at low light, they can do that. So they see very well, because they don't have the structures. So how do they compare, again, to us, to all other mammals? We're all linked together. Well, one is intellect. These are smart animals that we can do in reading them apart. For example, rats, they're smart too. They're just as good as decision makers as we are. I don't know if that offends you, but that's what's true. Animals also plan for the future. There's no reason your dog buries the bone and the squirrel buries the nuts. You know, I think I remember when we are. In timber, this was a dog I lived with for 16 years. And this is also a blatant advertisement of the book I wrote about here. We had a 16-year ride that was unbelievable. And it takes a book to explain. But she was brilliant. That was her third owner in less than 9 weeks, and she was abused by the previous type of trees and meat. But she was unbelievable. So we were like this. That intensity in the beginning was what got us so close. And then she just lost it back. She ate rocks, all sorts of emotional problems. When we got through it all, that's what it was about. We didn't do it. Well, when she wanted something, I was told to get it. If she couldn't physically get it herself, she got me to do it. So there's one incident I described where I'm eating dinner on the floor with my girlfriend, watching a movie. I live in the woods in the cabin. And she comes up, sits right in front of me, and she knows she's not supposed to bed. But she's allowed like half a pig's ear. And I was like, cocaine. And she wanted the other half. And it's just, the answer's no. No, get out of it. So you know what she did? She moved over here about 15 feet. Well, this is us looking at the TV set. This is her over here. Well, here's the kitchen. Everything's open. It's not a separate room. There's a stove with a cabinet, no doors, with a bag of pig's ears. So you know what she did? She looked at me like this. And tried a different strategy. It didn't work. And my girlfriend's going, did you see that? Had she not been there, I wouldn't even have believed it. And Timber tried it again 2 weeks later. And they said, no, you're not trained. So she stopped doing it. But the point is, these animals are smart, and they will apply different strategies to get what they need, especially when you're surviving. Body design. The fact that we all living organisms have DNA means we're all living together. Just like that. However, when it comes to mammals, in many respects, we all have the same kind of brain. The circuitry is a little different and modified depending on where you live. You live in the water, are you a wolf, you live on land, I mean, what? However, we have the same pattern. Vision is always in the back, motor movement is always front center, and coordinating movements in the cerebellum, it's always the same. It's just modified according to who you are, where you live. Emotions. Anybody who has a pet knows animals have emotions. Like, in order to vacuum, not to know that. A lot of people don't know that. But you have to be careful. Okay, human emotions are quite different than chipmunk emotions, okay? So, not necessarily saying, oh, you're my lover chipmunk, here's a flower. It's more like, here's dinner. And if you don't eat it, I will. So you have to be careful of putting in human emotions on things that are not human. But that doesn't mean they don't have fear, they don't have pain. So again, general patterns are all there. Remember these two guys? Let's look at them. Now here's some video of this. This is Joe, who grew up in captivity. You won't like this. And Tenino, you won't like her story. It's all very abusive, but they survived it. And they ended up together at Wolfhaven. And then 9 months later, out of ship. Studied them for several years. Let's see what happens. Joe was in Hamilton, Montana. He was part of a breeding program at some hybrid facility. And the owners come in, they went to Canada, got him out of a den, brought him back, and he was only a few weeks old. So this animal was in this enclosure for 4 years. And for some reason, these people had a sprinkler going on all these animals. For whatever idiotic reason. So he had nowhere to go. Well, they eventually didn't want to do this anymore. They gave the whole facility to this guy's father, this American. And he looked out the window, and about this time tonight, we were about to see the one from the wild, was getting chased by aircraft by the government on the news. So he looks out the window, and like, oh my God, these wild wolves, these bulls, I'm not supposed to have them. None of them were wild. So what should I do? So he goes to Bitterroot Humane Society and says, I'm going to let them all go. And they said, no, you're not. So they sent out these people to get them moving around to make a video clip to send to Wolfhaven International in Washington to see if is he a hybrid? Is he a wolf? What is he? At that time, they had no DNA testing. He's urinating now. What's that mean? Is Marcus territory? What is it? What is it? Yeah, stress. Stress response. So he ended up coming to Wolfhaven, but from a very, very terrible environment. So since it happened when he was young, his brain circuitry is literally never going to change. So what are you going to do for this kind of thing? I said, I won't be able to tell you any of my conclusions or anything without having known this history. That's similar history from tonight. At that time, the way to catch wolves in Montana, they're causing a problem, is to chase them with aircraft. In this particular case, this is just an example, it's not in here, but these are a couple of deer biologists flying around looking for the herd. Well, they happened to see these two wolves, and they swooped down on it and got some video, because that was cool. This is in the Helena National Forest. About 150 miles from me where I live. Well, I was working for the government at the time, just indirectly. I was teaching for UC Santa Barbara. And I brought my students, and we were collecting data for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at this time. They showed us this and said, go find these wolves, and we did. So, notice when these animals are having issues from above, they can escape. There's nowhere to go. So, when this happens to you a few times, like it did to tonight, you get kind of strange in the head, and we'll talk about that. But this is what happened to her. That's what I'm showing it to you, and it happened twice. Now, Tenino grew up in the 9 Mile Path in southwest Montana, near Missoula. This is in 1990. At that time, there weren't too many wolf packs in Montana yet. In Pleasant Valley, that's where I started my career. But it's just after this occurred. Pleasant Valley had a huge ranch in it with several thousand head of cattle. Well, they didn't know they had any wolves until some cattle started getting it. So the government came in, and sure enough, here's the first time they had to do wolf management. Well, they botched it up. They ended up killing an animal by accident. They got several individuals, radio collared them, put them into Glacier National Park, which was the political dumping ground for wolves at that time, and let them go. Well, the alpha female tried to find her way back to Pleasant Valley. Well, there's a big, huge lake there, if you haven't been there, called Flathead Lake. So she turned south and got pinned between Flathead Lake and the west face of the Rockies, which you see when you go into town. Well, she headed south, took a right, headed west, and ended up in the 9 Mile Valley. And there was a male standing there waiting for her. Let's have some pups. So they did. So in April 1990, they had 6 pups, one of which was Tenina. Well, unfortunately, the mother, after the pups were about 6 months of age, her collar, radio collar, was found cut and thrown into the Mallonee River, which means she was shot, killed, and they were trying to hide the evidence. That left the father, who is now radio collared by the government, to fend for 6 months. Well, one died by natural causes. One was kind of ostracized from the back. They just like, no, we don't like you. So I left 4 pups. Those 4 pups apparently crossed over the mountains and killed a couple steers at somebody's ranch. Well, the government came in, did that rodeo helicopter thing. Got 3 of them, got them under anesthesia. However, one wasn't enough. He called off, and for years after that, he was the leader of the company. However, as far as Tenina's concerned, Dad left with 3 pups because that other pup crawled off in the bushes, hidden, and now he's a leader for years. Those 3 pups, including Tenina, radar collar, put into Glacier National Park. As usual, they all went 3 different ways. 2 were shot by ranchers. Tenina crossed the Continental Divide into eastern Montana and apparently killed 2 sheep. So for the second time, they flew in and got her. They called Wolf Haven and said, we're going to kill this animal if you don't take her. So the Wolf Haven was credited anyway they took her. And no one at that point had ever taken a wild wolf and stuck it into captivity, not knowing the leader. So here's Wolf Haven. That's Joe up front. And here's Tenina. Oops. Excuse me, Mr. Good. You need to hear this, so listen carefully. There's something happening. Remember, this animal was chased by aircraft, and she didn't like that, and she didn't like a lot of things that Wolf Haven. So that's what we're going over. But the point is, here's a behavioral biologist studying these animals. That's their avenue for you. So what I found, nobody liked. But that's just too bad, I guess. But it was very instructive for dealing with wolves in the future, wildlands, and it's not going to happen because of what they found. At least the government's not going to put it. Tenina is coming up. Okay, something's coming. You hear what it is?
Helicopter?
No, but it's aircraft. Watch what she does. So I was throwing in milk bones. So she found her milk bones, took it, and went to her safe areas. I found out in England. What is Joe doing about this? He could care less. Now, this study included the 2 wolves off to the right. So when one event happened, like when one aircraft went over, I got to see quickly what all 4 wolves did. So she always stood there. So Nana to the left, Joe to the right. And watch what she does.
That's what I was doing. Yeah. That was sponsored. They're really sneaky. I just gave one to Joe. and back from the notebook first, but make time for tonight, I'll come over.
She relaxed.
She's almost more concerned about color of the sky than what it is. Look at that.
So she looked up, like,
We're looking up. Start rolling again.
okay, this is her safe area in the enclosure. Nobody had any idea this was going.
So each parent had their own individual responsibility today. Was the different things I'm giving them. That was the shotgun black. It was real.
It's just off to the right. Turns out there's a pig farmer right next to the elevator. So they stuck her right next to the existing property, and this guy shooting his gun off of her. Oh, it wasn't all bloom in June. It took months, but they finally laid it.
Mine was cut down.
It didn't last very long. Each time I saw it. So it's announced to the left, goes to the right. They're both black poles. It's kind of confusing. But watch what she does.
If we're looking towards the area, degrees area, for the past 5 minutes or so. Although I don't think all the concern. Hopefully we win.
So
Tree
we
climb.
wanted to help this animal and enrich her environment. What can you do? They live in this quarter-acre enclosure. She came from old Montana. He came from a box and now is in this enclosure. To him, it was Montana. Two different worlds colliding, two different unknowns. So the first year when I studied them, it was like two different packs of them. And I didn't see them interact much at all. It's like, what the hell's going on here? They really were. So it took several years, 3 years to sort it all out. And each was affecting the other. It's just neat. He conquered her now, he became more like a wolf. You know, instead of some dog, he just made him for food. Wolf Haven also has something called HoloLens every Friday, Saturday night. So that was over here. It was to raise money for the place. They had a big bonfire, and there's music playing and so on. So I always wondered why they wouldn't let me up on the hill to watch this animal while there was a howl. Well, here you go. First howl. So now to the left, Joe to the right. Watch what she does. See that? Look up at the trees, crouching. Now I didn't hear it yet, but she did.
Okay. Music just started, someone just started playing the guitar. It's pretty loud. So I'm assuming the camera can pick it up. And just as it started, this is what's occurring and she started circling all through.
So part of the problem was you stick her in a fishbowl. This aircraft flying over. Wolf Haven was Fort Lewis is straight ahead here, so they did a lot of bombing. SeaTac was flying over the top of her enclosure, and then there was Olympia Airport, where they grew that previously. So all the stressors that got her strange in the head to begin with were all still there, including the gunshots. So when the keepers came up here to feed her, she ran. And of course, no place was provided for her. Everyone else came up to the fence, oh, feed me, feed me. She took off. So, how do you deal with an animal that does this? First, you have to identify what the problem is. Well, she had post-traumatic stress. You go to the medical literature, and there it is. Now, to get post-traumatic stress, you have to have some of these behaviors in each of these categories to qualify for that. Post-traumatic stress is a conglomeration of things. Each one of these things could be their own psychological disorder. Well, what did she have? Sleep problems. I was there because I was sleeping for 5 days. Hypervigilance, which is all, where all those people were, all the noise. Exaggerated startles. She'd step on a stick and just flip out. Others will step on a stick, you have control, I don't know what they do. avoiding activities like the keepers coming up. Flashbacks, that was an interesting one. She would look at it is better, and every once in a while she'd go under those huge boughs of trees, those two big cedar trees. She'd get under the bough and she'd crouch and her ears would go down. She'd crawl, then get up, and continue her pace back. So I went to the government and asked them, how the hell did you get this now? What did you do to her? And they said, well, they were scared. They weren't in the forest. So they brought the helicopter down on top of the trees and scared them all out, and boom! So that happened to her twice. Just to reinforce it. So we'll take this problem was, how do we deal with something like this? Oh, added benefits. You look at that. Wolves don't normally look at it. You got to give them a reason to look at it. So she got her. So I found 2 other places that were better facilities. You know, one place that wasn't like a fishing. And she got it. Stressed in mind. Human perspective. What is it we're doing to help the puzzle? Well, I asked the question, does the world even care about wolves? I'm a computer tech. I fix Macs computers. And I work one day, it's like, okay, let's go Google, let's do a search for wolf and see what pops up. Once we search this, you should go to Google and get all these stats. So the search term for wolf, and it turns out there's wolf it's very popular. There's plural, just plural wolves, hunting wolves, killing wolves. Well, at that time I did this, that there was over 7 billion people in the world and the US population. Well, what percentage of the population is actually doing these searches? Very little. As you got the hunting wolves, killing wolves, that was a big deal at that time. At least in our state. It's first nobody's looking for this kind of information. However, at that time, Apple came out with a new iPhone. So you go search for that, all of a sudden. So that's what most people care about. What's that? Oh, wow. However, nobody really knows about these issues. That's why it's unbelievable what's happening. And nobody knows. So, let's go to Montana then. What is the public attitude towards wolves? This won't be a shocker. Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks is the state agency responsible for managing wolves. So they did their own survey. They surveyed about 1,500 people, asked them several questions. They divided them into groups: household people, hunters, people who buy just the wolf tags that hunt wolves. What do you think about this? So, it's no secret that most Montanans, apparently feel intolerant of wolves. Now remember, it's 1,500 people representing 1 million, so I don't know how that works. Montanans are dissatisfied with Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. They're not doing enough to kill them. And they let us do it. So they started, I think most of 2009 when they came out from the new species classification. But after Fish, Wildlife, and Park increased the quota from 75 wolves to 220 in the next time, well, according to the survey, people like Fish, Wildlife, and Park. But out of 220 wolves, 166 were killed. So apparently it was the empowerment of having the option to go kill them, not actually kill them. However, they never seem to get to their quota every year. So what else might be happening?
The wolves are adopted. The wolves are adopted.
No. There's not that many wolves. There's not as many wolves as they're reporting. Okay? So I did a paper. I reviewed the government's whole population data and published it in a peer-reviewed scientific journal. And now they're not happy with the their data is not. And that's what's going out to the public. That's what they publish. However, what else is happening in Montana? Well, there's research. It turns out I'm the only behavioral biologist basically in the entire state. And we're known for our wolves. And I'm the only one studying wolf behavior. Everybody else works for the government. And they're studying things that help manage. So they're studying deer and elk. conjunction with wolves, not just what are wolves, no one's ever asked. In Yellowstone National Park, however, they've been studying wolves for quite some time. But outside of that, national forest, I barely hit. So I studied the fish trap back for 10 years. I found the travel routes, the inside, rendezvous sites, or where they take the pups after digging. Throughout the summer and every 2 or 3 weeks, that changes when we move the pups around. Until around October, when the entire pack goes nomadic. So these pups will be having to train from being born in April or so, March or April, to on the go in only a few months. If you don't make it, you die. So pup mortality tends to be high, about 50% in some years. So I use sweet-collared wolves, supplied by the government, to demonstrate the behavior of the entire pack. My research question was, well, is a wolf pack doing everything together as a group or not? I mean, what are they doing? I think we know that by now after 500 years of persecuting these animals, but we don't. Just basic questions. So I ended up having the only study that actually looked at that. And I think you want to know that, wolf manager, what beings or what are you doing to these animals? Well, that's not there. That's science question.
Question.
Yes.
Are you doing research in Yellowstone which shows that the reintroduction of wolves caused a restoration of all sorts of things, including the trout fisheries?
Yes.
As well as sort of
We're not going over that.
Pardon?
We're not doing that.
I think it's pretty useful because like politically, those of us who would like to support the wolves would like to have that information because the fact is,
You can go look it up, it's online.
It's all in, okay, I know about it, I just thought people might want to hear it. It's important for the politics.
Sure, but tonight we're doing what I, at that time when I was doing my research, like a good little scientist, I reviewed all the data, all the research that's out there. And at that time, Leach and Boitani, the two greatest wolf biologists on the planet, did their own book. And it was a bunch of chapters. They invited scientists to contribute. Well, they had their own 2 chapters. So my research question I found in there. And their first chapter, they did social behavior of wolves. And they claim that the basic pack is a tight-knit unit year-round. But there was no data to support it. On page 31, they stated that little is known about the patterns of post-injury. Well, if you don't know what's going on after they're netting, how did you say they're tight-knit all year? Oops. So they had science to do. So I looked at more studies. Science assumed that wolf packs did most everything together as a group. And somehow that just got in there for a little. The scientific literature is filled with these phrases of loses a group, tight-knit year-round, it's everywhere. But there's no proof. So a group of wolves, I think this is the whole pack or sons. Tight-knit can mean socially or physically. No proof anywhere. And so the definition of these statements, they're either non-specific or quantified, just assume, or not defined. So that's what I was stuck with. So there was nothing to show for that. It took 10 years to do this. So at this point, what do we know about that? What is science actually? Wolves live in social groups, it's called that. Everybody knows that, right? What's it called? Who are the head animals? Alphas. How many alphas do you have? No, 2. One for male, one for female. Then it mixes up through gender. It's all guided by hierarchies. Very stressful. So wolf packs tend to be a process in which everybody contributes. Okay, so let's go over how that works. And these processes are linked in geographic regions. We know that. We don't know how it works, but we know that packs interact with other packs, fill up entire states of social interaction. For example, the latest data out of Montana came from Montana Fish and Wildlife Parks, their annual report, which is what I reviewed. Here is the latest, and we'll get to it, but this is to demonstrate that all these packs are grouped together in different regions. And the different regions form networks. And the networks are clear across the state. So if you start messing with wolves in the southern part, it eventually affects the wolves in the northern part. And we know this from studies in Canada. These researchers studied wolves outside of Algonquin National Park, which is protected, so all the packs in there, they weren't being hunted. But the ones outside of the park were, even hundreds of miles away. Well, it turned out it eventually affected the social behavior, the development of social behavior over time of the wolves who were with. How did that happen? Read it. Well, it turns out they didn't kill everybody in the pack. It just blew them apart. So the survivors, some went gone. Well, it turns out other wolf packs can take in other individual wolves, incorporate them into the hierarchy, and their uniqueness, their own behavior, their own ungo, how they see the world, started affecting the entire house. It happened quickly. It wasn't evolved over a period of time where it was nice and smooth. It just happened. Does that make sense? And it was so stark, these researchers did. So to continue the list there, go the other way, within a pack. Well, we did know they break up into little subgroups, so go on, find potential mates for very social reasons. Like turn your tea. They do this after church every Sunday. But from a wolf's perspective, if your survival depends on the uniqueness and the ability of all individuals to contribute, anything that disrupts that process, puts everybody in jail. So what did I find with the distribution? Well, there were 3 collared wolves I was dealing with. There's an adult male. It's the size of the territory. That town's a few hundred square miles. All the red dots are GPS locations of this wolf. All the arrows are the known pathways for those that wolf path through the forest, mostly logging roads. And all the blank areas are mountain peaks. So you can see they don't even really use mountain peaks. There's the adult female. It's all favorite color. I also put prints on here in scat. You can see these gray ovals, those are the rendezvous sites for that year, and the den site. This is the dark strip. Scats on there too. So it all gives you locations of these wolves. So in all, there's over 1,000 GPS locations. If you remove it, you get Indian. But it gives you an idea, get rid of all the mess. And these wolves are everywhere all the time. Perpetual motion, 24 hours a day. So if you were tired of hunting, then you picked it up and you did and you did. And everybody divided up the labor. So ultimately, out of those 10 years, there was a 2-year period, almost 2 years, where I went out every single day under all conditions. And no one had ever done it. And I found these wolves 82% of the time. So they're pretty predictable at that point. Now, this is looking for 3 collared wolves, so I had the transfer in here. I found them, but they're driving around a lot. So, here's the adult female, adult male, young female. So I decided, well, the 603-day period when I did all that, that represented 532 surveys. That's a lot, under all conditions. So I decided, well, who's pairing with whom here? How is this going to tell me how the whole pack operates? Well, when it says adult female, adult male, young female, I just found that one collared wolf on that one particular survey. It doesn't mean they were alone. It just means I found that one collared wolf. Okay? Some surveys I found 2 of them together. All the possibilities are there. And on some surveys I found all 3 collared wolves together. It's a club. You had to have a collared game. Well, up there, that's 31% of all the surveys I found all 3 together. So what does that tell you about that percentage? What's the only possible combination in which the entire pack could have been together? Everybody counted. Speak up. The 31%. It's required that those 3 collared wolves have to be there to have a full pack, right? Well, that's a minority of all the times I've been there. And it happened under all conditions for almost 2 years. So it's saying this pack spent a minority of the time. Completely contradicting with science. Because no one had ever measured it before. All the other previous studies, they took a collared wolf and they They let it go through all the forests and bear all the lines until the leaf comes out the rest of it. So the point is, my view of wolves, they are tied to the social network. It backs up a large business. Just because you don't see the son, the father doesn't see the daughter over a week's time or so, it doesn't make it any less of a family, does it? So wolves are just too busy. They have lots to do to stand up. And if everyone's not contributing, no one stays alive. Wolf lifespans aren't really long. It's a hard thing. So they're always in perpetual motion. So rather than a thing, to me, a wolf acts in process. It's its own force. It's greater than the sum of the parts. The parts are the wolves themselves. But they create this force that goes through the wilderness, interacting with everything, including other paths, forming regions of interactions that are stable. They're like the root system of the tree. Here's a couple minutes of the real fish trap wolves. And these are really their house.
These daytime calls?
No, they're not coordinated with what you say. No, they're all recorded at night. My students, one summer we found a pup shot thrown into a ditch. And I kept smelling this thing and I thought it was their next kill. I was going to take the students to it. And I couldn't find it. So I told the students, all go find this thing. Timber found it. I just let her go. She found it. 20 seconds. This is their dead side. Camp and a wolf buck jumped out right in front of us. So we stopped and took video. So, how do you control beings who live like this? You don't. So, we try. So let's talk about what's going on. Here's this map again. It represents 147 verified facts of 2 or more animals. So apparently in Montana, a year back, there's 2 or more hanging out for a while. Pups aren't required. Yeah, let's make that distinction. It represents a minimum of 625 wolves. Okay? Now remember that word, minimum. That's what the government's claiming. So 2012, the end of 2012, there were 625 wolves in Montana, at least. So, how are they doing this? Well, first, Montana Fish and Wildlife Parks, again, it's a state agency responsible for wolf management. Every state has one, not always called that. And they claim that management and hunting of wolves is based on science. It's all over their website. So again, I published the paper, I reviewed that data and that claim. So right here. It's also on our website. And I found their data was not only flawed, but blatantly wrong. And debunked their claims to science. So they're not happy with being debunked. And you can find it on their website. It's right there. It's always there. And they're claiming well-regulated hunts based on science. Wolf management based on science. They're also claiming that we need to kill wolves now because wolves are killing more livestock. It's increased. And the concerns about the wolf population in areas where there are, the things that eat deer, moose, elk. The concerns are they're wiping out the prey populations. So, time to start killing wolves. Let's start with livestock. Is this true or not? Well, here's why. In their annual reports, they supply these graphs or these tables. So here come the numbers. Don't worry about it. This is depredation. Depredation means wild animals are killing your livestock. That's all it means. So most of the time it's cattle and sheep, most of the cattle. So here it is for all the years of wolf management in Montana. Well, it stopped in 2010 because they changed in their annual report how to report this stuff. So it makes it very difficult to make comparisons easier. So I just took it out of their other two. As you can see, depredation in 2009, we're actually going down. So let's take 2009 as the example. 97 cattle were lost to wolves. Apparently, no one in Montana ever asked the question about how many cattle. How many cattle are in Montana? 2.6 million.
Are these verified by the?
These are very good. These are verified by Montana Fish and Wildlife Department. Now, granted, there are probably way more depredations than these. They couldn't verify. A cow bloated in the hot sun after a week after it's been killed. You can't quite tell what killed it. But we'll get to it. 2.6 million cattle and 97 apparently. Let's just, none of these numbers won't make any sense, okay? So don't try to make sense of it. Let's just get through it. They're not supposed to make sense. So that means, and they're not accurate, so don't worry about it. It's just a pattern here that you need to see. So wolves here kill apparently 0.004% of the cattle. So it's not even killing wolves. Now that's the whole state. To be fair, most of the most of the wolves are on the west side of the state. So how many cattle are over there? About 500,000. Okay, so 97 went down, 0.02%. So where's the problem? Let's look at sheep. 33,000 sheep. Wolves killed up 202 of them, which is pretty rare, as you can see from up there. Half of those were in one incident up in Eureka, Canada. So it's unusual. However, it's still only 0.6% of the sheep per load. If you add the cattle and the sheep together, wolves are responsible for 0.06% of total livestock. So even if they kill 1,000 cattle, let's just get absurd, it's 0.2%. And that's in the west side of the state, where there are fewer. So where's the justification? It doesn't exist. And they're saying that no one. You don't have to be a genius to do this. Get a calculator, get a ruler, and give it a few hours of time, you could have figured this out too. You'll be Einstein for this one. However, statistically, this problem doesn't even exist. However, I do live on a ranch. And there's nothing statistical about losing your cows. They're $500 to $1,000 a pop every time they go down. So it's a lot of money. And most ranchers are just like us. They don't make a whole lot of money. They're always on the edge. And the statistics don't show how many cows they had to begin with. Losing 9 out of 10 is quite different than losing 9 out of 1,000.
Don't they get reimbursed by the federal government?
No, they've never got reimbursed by the federal government. They were reimbursed by defenders of wildlife. And then they were upset at the government. Their own government won't even help them. So that's how that's their own. For the prey population, it's the second reason to kill all these wolves. Well, in Montana, prey population numbers are never measured annually, so we don't actually know how many deer, elk, moose, and whatever actually in the environment. In northwest Montana, where I live, it's a whole huge region. It's never been ever. In southwest Montana and in Yellowstone National Park, there are a few studies done on the coveted elk. Hunters want wolves dead because they apparently kill too many elk. So that's the only research that really been done. Well, a huge study was done several years ago and determined that in the presence of wolves in different areas of southwest Montana and Yellowstone, some populations of dogs declined, some did nothing, and some actually increased. These are both good. Right now, the federal government, not the federal government, scratch that, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, which is the state level, is doing their own study. It's a 3-year study. This is year 2. Here's the summary. It's all public information. You can go online, download this. Well, they looked in the Bitterroot in 2 major areas of the Bitterroot, which is southwest Montana, near Idaho. In one area, you can see all these different animals here that are apparently predating on elk. In one area, there are no wolf kills. In the other area, 1. So they determined mountain lions are responsible for most of the calf predation on elk. So you know what they did? They increased the quota on mountain lions for the next season of hunt. And now they're going to bring in a team of scientists to study the mountain lion. After they're already being blasted away. So much for mountain lion behavior. That's how all this works. So it's all dependent on how many wolves are really out there. So how do these guys count these wolves? Well, I asked. First, for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, at the state level, there are 5 human beings that count all the wolves in the entire state of New York. So already, some kids, and they admit to that. Plus, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks also admits they don't have any idea how many total wolves there are in the state. That's why they use the minimum number. So right now, we're trying to determine what we need. The data provided in the under reports, that's what I analyzed. And every year, this wolf management specialists go out and count the number of wolves in their region. We're just doing an overview here, and then we'll get specific. It's like, how do I know that? So when you add all the 5 together, that's the minimum number of wolves in Montana, because they know they missed a bunch. This makes sense, and it's true. But the annual minimum number is not used to make management decisions, like how many wolves we got. These numbers are put into mathematical models which determine that quota. They don't release that information in the model they use. However, you can now make the claim or make statements comparing one year to the next. For example, there's a 50% increase, they claim, from the year 2010 to 2011. 50% minimum more wolves that year. So there's more wolves waiting to hunt. So let's see if that's true. Remember this. We're getting back to it. Data collection is crucial. You need to use science. You just can't run around. There's a wolf, there's a wolf, there's a wolf. So scientific approach is this. And they're claiming they use it. Okay? So I asked one of those 5 wolf management specialists in California where I work. What protocols do you use? I didn't tell him I was writing this paper. I just said, well, I didn't use the word science either. I said, what protocols do you use to count these animals? So he wrote back in an email, there are no protocols. No protocol would even be necessary. It's like, are you kidding me? This one person completely invalidated this entire agency's science. Oops. You got a lot of time. So the exact methods they do use to count wolves have never been recorded. However, he did tell me he does involve aircraft, vehicles, tracking, and asking people. Now, it's not like some bigot says, oh, there's 22 wolves over there, oh, and then you put down 22. It's just, no, there's wolves over there. So they went over there and counted. How they counted them? So how do scientists actually do this? Let's compare it with that. Well, in high school, you learn this stuff, these things. So it's pretty simple, straightforward. If you're looking at a population, you have to know how many animals are coming in each year and how many are going out, right? Well, there's several ways to do that. Immigration, everybody knows that word. Well, any population, individuals are joining. That's what immigration is. Emigration is the opposite. Sometime during that year, they left, for whatever reason. And of course, there's births. So the basic equation is the growth rate, meaning is the population shrinking or increasing each year? It's way more complicated than this. This is the Reader's Digest. It involves these 4 main factors. So I put together a table with all the data for all those years of how animals actually left, were killed or whatever. Now, this is just a table of raw data. It's not meaningful to anyone. So you have to do stuff. So let's construct a picture of what these people are claiming. Let's pick 2009 because that was the year there were the most depredations, okay, the most damage. So let's do that. Let's bring it out here so I can blow it up so everybody can see it. So in that year, they claim by December, by the end of the year, a minimum of 524 wolves. And here are all the categories of how the wolves left that month. There were 280. Add all this up, 280, which means throughout the year, they're actually, according to them, they're claiming 804 wolves on their line. But things happen to them, so by the end of the year, that's the minimum count. Okay. So let's compare this to the growth equation, which the scientists will use. There's immigration. How do you measure immigration? You can't. It's not physically possible. The word immigration is not even ever used in the agriculture. Okay, this is important. We'll get to this. But let's just get through this part and you're going to see where's this coming from. Immigration. Only 15 wolves. Everybody else basically died. And then they reported in the text of this report that there were 166 folks in it. And I'll tell you how they know that, but that was reported too. So let's look at that. Remember, this is for 1 year. They did this every year. Well, there's two unknowns in this equation you can't solve to get the things. Meaning, immigration will always be unknown because you can't physically measure it. So the growth rate is going to be unknown. You can't use math to find either one of those numbers. So, immigration never measured, can't be calculated. The immigration numbers, it turns out, were based on a few hollow numbers. It's a guess. But you can't be standing there, oh, did they leave? You know, where's your passport? So, you know, they just will do whatever they want. So it's a guess too. So to be practical, half the equation is missing every year. Plus, there's two categories we haven't even used yet. So the growth equation makes no sense because it was never used. Again, science will agree. So, how was the minimum number of to make their claims that we can now kill more and more wolves? That's what this is about. So we're going to use another approach. Let's back up here for the year, and I made a flow diagram using their numbers. So, at the end of 2009, again, they claimed 524 wolves. Okay, so we have to figure out how to get there. Well, at the beginning of 2009, that's the same as the end of 2008. So let's put that reported number. So I developed from 497 wolves to 524 by the end of the year, using their numbers. Well, those 280 came out of the table as usual. They were removed, so now you're down to 217. So somewhere throughout the year, 207 wolves were added to this population of wolves. Which means they had to have come from Canada or surrounding states and stayed. Okay? Well, they reported the births. There's only two ways you get into a population. You're born into it or you walk into it. Okay? Immigration is never known. You can't measure it. It's never mentioned. So there's 141 mystery wolves. They're just assumed in that final number. And nowhere ever asked the question, what was the final number? There's a number of wolves in there that are missing. Where are they? So I asked them that question. Where are those 141 wolves? They haven't answered my question. And on the other 6 questions that I have. So immigration is unverified. It's never mentioned in the report. It's not even measured. There's no way to calculate it using math. So it's speculative. However, it's used to help calculate the end of the year minimum number. So they do this every year. So let's go through it. Let's just pull out all the unverified wolves and start adding them up. In 2004, it's a double whammy for them. They actually have fewer wolves. Okay, well, dispersed wolves, according to them, those are the immigrated ones, right? Well, they didn't do the math. There's 24 apparently left. Had they known that, it would have been reported in the dispersed category. So they didn't even use the basic math that they didn't check. And now this number is just flying out. So 24 more unverified. The unverified things are in red. So let's just start pulling them out. Now let's have it. So each year it gets bigger and bigger, more or less. That's the better. And you end up with a whole plethora of wolves that don't exist, apparently. This is unverified. Now, in the year 2012, that was the last report. Notice they didn't even report the number of births anymore. You know why? They said the public was getting confused, so they don't even report that information. So now it's impossible to calculate it. So we can't use it. Well, let's add this up. Over a 9-year period, 762 wolves were made up, which means that's an error of 21.4% on average every year. But the reported minimum number, which means when they make the claim, oh, there was an increase of 50%, their error is greater than what they claim. So how could they possibly know? No one ever knows. So we don't have any idea how many wolves we have. I get asked that all the time. I have no idea. We have wolves. So, all these wolves are unaccounted for over a 9-year period. And we have it scientifically, and they're, at the end of your numbers are just claims. They're not real. This is all important because they use those numbers to make management plans. And then how many wolves do you keep? That's the point. And to make it worse, the same guy sent back, well, none of our wolves accounts are completely unique. Maybe they have no idea. Apparently. So none of it makes sense. And here's a summary of all of that. There's no quality control, there's no anything. However, there's no accountability either. There's no repercussions to fish, wildlife, and parks for killing a bunch of wolves and no scientific stuff. That's to come from the public, and no one's speaking up. And now that there's hunting seasons, they're creating revenue for killing wolves. Now money's so now it's a moral issue. It's just one thing, one right after the other. So if you want to know more, go to my website. You can download all this stuff, raw PDFs, or take a copy right here. And you can learn what's really going on. We haven't even mentioned bears and cougars and everything else. They're doing the same things. Wolves are just defined. They don't pass, then it'll be something else. But they're a great example of what's really going on. Yeah. Just make it up. Now, it doesn't mean they're sitting at a desk and this number sounds good. I think it's worse than that. They actually think they're measuring stuff and it doesn't work. And they don't check to see if it doesn't work. So there's no quality control over their data at all. What's happening here? Let's go about that. Well, here are the brief summary of the hunting season. The wolves came off the endangered species list in 2009. Within 3 months, they're being hunted. It's unprecedented. At that time, the trapper, there was no trapping then. There's trapping now. But each person that had a wolf tag would get one wolf. They never reach their quotas, and they keep increasing the number of wolves we can get. So at the end of this month, now it's 5 wolves per person. And we have no idea how many wolves are out. None. Even their minimum numbers are low. So we don't know. So what is this doing to the environment? That's how I'll end this. Let's take a look.
Is there any oversight at all from the federal government?
We're going to talk about that. Great question. Just remember, you're correct. This is just the state level. So let's see what's really going on. And then I'm like, right to it. This all began about 25 years ago. And at that time, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service was responsible, it was made responsible by the Endangered Species Act to oversee endangered species, to find what they are, who they are, put them on the endangered species list, and now supply the monies by the act to get them off the list. So we did that for lots of things already. The gray eagles have come off, bald eagles have come off. Now it's the wolves' turn. Well, In 2009, the wolves were removed from the endangered species list, not the act. So there's still a little bit of federal oversight. So the state began hunting. But this was an experiment. To get wolves completely off the Endangered Species Act, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the federal level, wanted to make sure these states were actually managing their wolves properly. So they stipulated you can't blast them all into oblivion. By the end of the year, you must prove that you have at least 100 wolves in your state, and those 100 wolves must include 10 breeding years. Now, for the future. Where the 100 came from is unverifiable too. It's still biological significance, but it's a political number. That's what they wrangled with in Congress and came up with that and said, here, you guys got it. So in theory, you could have 300 wolves total in 3 giant states, and that's it. The rest you can kill. However, there is a current issue here, and it's a problem because everybody's screwing this up. The public doesn't know anything about Montana. They just don't know in general. However, they're starting to find out about U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's proposal to get all wolves off the Endangered Species Act. You guys are reading that on the paper? Okay. There's a problem here. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is saying they are not fully recovering these wolves. Now, from their perspective, from their own goal, they did their job. For 25 years, they got wolves back, and they did a good job. They did a good job. Now you got to turn it over to the state who are blowing everything away. So that's the stipulation. But politically speaking, apparently U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is sick of this. They can't win this one. We did our job. The wolves are back. If you guys screw this up, that's on you. So they want to be done with this. Get them off the Endangered Species Act. Totally. However, it's the real problem here. And that is, lots of organizations aren't liking this. We want wolves on the endangered species, at least covered by the Endangered Species Act. Well, okay, they already are. And they're getting slaughtered. So even if the public wins this, if the status quo stays the same, the wolves are getting slaughtered, give us all anyway. Because nobody knows what's going on. Or Idaho, or Hawaii. So they're being systematically removed. Wolves are a crop. And as you saw, they're making hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars a year doing it. It's revenue. They hunt everything right. Why not wolves too? So if the status quo remains, and the public gets what they want, there'll be hundreds and hundreds of dead wolves. So the real issue is at the state level. Unless these people are held accountable for what they do, or the control is taken away from them for managing wolves, they're all simple as that. Because it's already happened. And if U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is the most likely scenario, actually gets them off the endangered species list, now the states are free to kill them. With no federal oversight at all. They'll just slaughter. Now we get to start over again. However, if we do, they're back on the endangered species list for protect. But there's no rules. And we've learned nothing. That's what's going on in all 3 states. I haven't done the numbers for you. Montana's a handful of them. So what can you do about this? You can certainly spread the word of what's going on. People can't even want to care if they don't even know what the issue is. I've also started an online petition to end the hunting and killing the wolves in Montana. Not the management part, because there are conflicts there that needs to be resolved. But we're talking about blatant hunting, making money, and just wasting the environment. I went to the governor's office and complained about this. I bought my paper. They said, oh, we're going to investigate. So the petition's online. It's not to, the petition itself won't solve anything. I just need the signatures to get back to the governor's office for the media to make a bigger sting. So that's one way to do it. I'm over 100,000. I'm only at 17,000. Yeah, who cares? That's the point. Or there's a larger category. They don't even know this problem exists. See, they don't have the choice to hear. So For me, this is the beginning of the beginning. 100,000 signatures, that's completely unrealistic, and I know that. I just picked it because most successful petitions have that number of people listening to me, this and that. This has been going on for years, but I'll always be in this face. They do not like me, and I had a huge effect within their hierarchy system. One person. Can you imagine if you know the truth and all the organizations got organized into this? There would be no wolf killing. But the truth's there. All the numbers are there. It's always been there. That's what's so horrible. If they're just daring you to get in the face. You can also email them directly. It's all over the petition. It's on my website. Just get in their face. Most of the rules I've been talking about, they're national forests. Who owns national forests? You do. And everything in it. They're your wolves. Tell them to stop. So in my view, humanity needs to rise up and say no. Not just about wolves or anything that's being destroyed. Why should you do this? This is how we're going to end it. Again, you're going to have to stop. Not some goofy little biologist, not aware, all of us. At the moment, the public doesn't even know what's going on. They can't choose the arrow, they just don't. And the killing wolves is part of a much larger picture. I used to teach environmental science. And talk about breweries, these are awesome stuff, but it was so depressing. And the students want to know what we do and shoot ourselves. So I had to come up with a lab and empower them to do things. And it wasn't a test. Well, in 2011 or so, all the famous ecologists of the planet got together. They reviewed all the data that had to do with predators and the environment. And it was published in Science, the #1 journal of science in the world. These are all very famous. And they're saying, you know what? At every single ecosystem on Earth that we've studied so far, we've killed the predators, and it's all going straight to hell. So if we don't do something, we're in a lot of trouble. And it turns out there's a huge downward effect the predators have on the ecosystem they're living in. This called trophic cascade was fixed in a minute. But here's what we ended up studying with the fish plant. We're getting rid of those interactions. And when it comes to wolves, they're networks the size of states, and it's all disappearing. And everything they interact with. They no longer exist. The government got one. No problem. I'm looking for a wolf. I'll walk right by that house. Wolf tax don't let it exist. We use the shot. It's what this paper is saying about consumers, they have an influence that trickles down to the very grass and diseases that are expressed in the bottom of the food chain. That's the powerful effect they have. By definition, predators are lower in numbers. They're fewer in numbers. So they're easy to dispose of. So we just got rid of that huge population. Just last week, a study came out and said, well, the wolves are preserving the berries by killing the elk, because there's too many elk in Yellowstone National Park. They're trampling it to death. Now the grizzly bears are starving to death because the pine nuts in the particular tree species they depend on to fatten up in the winter, the trees are dying because of this. Huge effects with predators. And it's known as trophic cascade. That effect cascades down through the system and everybody benefits. So the loss of predator species, such as wolves, is destructive. In the water and on land, that's what these people do. It's everywhere. And the consequences are not only devastating, but they are now being pushed along by poaching, habitat destruction, and focus. Wolf management contributes to this because they claim science and they completely ignore huge areas of science, including basic ecological principles that any high school reads. So some management might be necessary, but managing by numbers is disaster. You keep killing wolves, you disrupt the pack function, you remove the individual's influence, it's all leading to the degradation of the people. So all these little pictures add up to the big one, and that is we are on the block. We can't keep doing this. We're already in trouble. They're saying disaster. So that's around the corner. because everything's about to collapse ecologically. And it all begins with eliminating need. So I'll finish with Kiri. I was training in 17 years ago to be exact, because he recently died. But that's when he was a year old. This is the whole park in Indiana. They had all these wolves born in captivity, they had a pack. And there's pack of 7 animals, and a 7-acre enclosure that even had a lake to swim in. So they would train the public or people, scientists like myself. They'd go into the enclosure and meet these wolves. But sometimes they pick somebody out and they greet you. This is what happened with Kiri. So Kiri came over and decided to say hello. So this is typical wolf greeting, but I'm not a wolf. And I ended up with a furrow on my chin. I thought he got me with, a tooth on. That isn't what happened. The photographer was standing right here. Ripped off like 5 pictures in 6 seconds. And this is what really happened. So he's greeting me, like your dog does, basically. So he ended up fighting. It came right down on my chin. So he got with his cane down and he would have to really fast.
But that was a friendly fight, wasn't it?
It was very, yes.
It's happened.
He's very happy. He's like, okay, I'm almost as tall as you. Nothing to do. And so he decided, I'm going to greet you. Absolutely, that's how we greet each other. I'm just not a wolf, so I got a little injury.
You gave me a place only that his ears are back. That's a friendly gesture.
Yes, of course.
That Monty taking pictures.
Say again?
Monty.
Monty was saying.
Those women have that's his style, products and place.
Yeah, then he sells them to you. For
Yeah,
so that
that's how he raises money.
So, I'll end with that. And there's a website if you want to know more.